Welcome to this week's episode of Information Return Intelligence, the weekly podcast where we talk about all things related to 1099s and Form 1042S. I'm your host, Jason Dinesen, and this week we're going to talk about the draft version of the W-9 that's out there. And we have a guest to walk through this proposed new W-9 and talk about what it might mean for AP departments and what you should be doing to get ready. Our guest is Deborah Richardson, an accounts payable speaker, consultant, and trainer. We'll talk more about who Deborah is at the end. Let's not delay any longer here, though. Let's get right into our subject of the week, the new or proposed new W-9. All right, well, this time around, we want to talk about the proposed W-9 that the IRS has come out with in draft format. And I checked just a little bit ago. It's still in draft format, and March of 2024 is still the version that you should use as of the recording of this podcast. But there is it's more significant than you might think, this proposed change in the draft. So I can explain it in about maybe 30 seconds or so, maybe even less than that. The change is anyone who marks individual sole proprietor on the W-9 would have to give a social security number and not an EIN. That is like the 10-second elevator pitch version of what this proposed change is. So, Deborah, my question for you is when you hear me say that, what goes through your mind?
So, first of all, I actually like the fact that they are very clear about that in this new version, and it's clear. Um, and so that part is good. But my thing is, that would have been an easy thing to add to the March 2024 version. So we would not have to have a yet another version like less than 2 years or 18 months, however long, whenever it finally gets published, right? And if you look at the description of or in the instructions for the W-9, how it tells the vendor how to submit or how to fill out the W-9. And if you look at the March 2020 version language, it tells them that they can either use their social security number or their EIN, but the IRS prefers that they submit their social security number. But if you look at the language for the newest draft version, it tells them to submit or to enter in their social security number. That would have been so easy to add to the March 2024 version, right? So not quite sure why they didn't do that, but I like the fact that it's clear. We'll go with that.
That's true. And without getting us too deep in the weeds and leading
Yeah.
us astray too much, I really the reason for this, I think, I mean, of course, the IRS hasn't said anything about any of this, but I think that it's single member LLCs are the driving force behind this because single member LLCs a lot of times are taxed as sole proprietors. And
Yes.
the rule has always been that you shouldn't put the LLC's EIN on the W-9. That's not new. That's actually in the instructions to the W-9. It's always been that way, that it's supposed to be the proprietors information, either their social security number or their EIN, not the LLC's EIN, if it's that type of LLC taxed as a sole proprietor. But you and I know, I'm sure our listeners know, that a large majority of the time they're getting the LLC's EIN on that W-9.
Yes.
And that,
Yes.
so I think that's one of those things where it's probably a legitimate thing that the IRS is dealing with to help them match up 1099s to who actually
Mhm.
is reporting the income. The problem is going to be how is this going to work in the real world? And I think maybe that leads to our next question, Deborah, of what do you think an AP department should be doing now to prepare for the possibility of this? This is just a draft, so it's not in action yet. But what are some things people should be doing to get
Yeah.
ready for this?
So I would say the first thing is to just not panic, right? Because this podcast is going to be published when everyone's coming back from a nice holidays, right? Had maybe a couple weeks off, or you didn't work full weeks for the past couple of weeks, so it's been kind of light. And so coming back, you're going to be hit with all these things, especially right? The 1099, 1042, right? Tax reporting season. And this may affect that. However, right, it's not published yet. We know how long it took for the March 2024 version to be finally published, because it originally came out, the draft form of the W-9 came out July 26th, I think, of 2023. And it was not published until March 2024, well after the tax season. Thank you, IRS, for that. So we don't know that it's going to be published in January. And so I would say have it in your mind, but don't start panicking. Continue with your tax reporting tasks that you need to do. And so, but I would say that keep checking, right? Put a bookmark of, right. And Jason, I think you were talking about your advice you always give is have a bookmark of the version of the W-9, because when it changes, you'll see it on the version because it's the same bookmark. It'll just update the version number. So keep checking that. And then I would also say, you might want to just make sure, and it's a perfect time anyway, because it's tax reporting season. Make sure you actually have tax IDs, and make sure that, you're doing your 10 matches, especially for the reportable vendors, to make sure that you're not reporting inaccurate legal name and tax ID combinations. And so I think that, right, the data management, making sure that it's accurate, and continuing with your tax reporting duties so that you do not, right, file late, you don't send the recipients statements late. Concentrate on that, because I will tell you, the biggest question I get is, will the IRS issue, right, or publish the new version of the W-9 in January? And not only do I not know, but I don't think the IRS actually knows either. So continue with your normal tax reporting tasks when you come back in January, but keep it in the back of your mind. Get that bookmark, keep checking every day so that you know when the new version actually is published.
And that kind of leads into our next thing that we want to talk about is a few things that I would say, and then I'll lead into the question, which is,
Yeah.
so the thing that I would say is, bookmark, like you say, because you remember and I remember that the IRS said nothing about the March of 2024 update. They just put it out there. And so, in fact, the IRS has a W-9 page on their website. The W-9 is a popular thing. So they have a
Yeah.
page and there's a section that says recent developments or something like that. And it's always said no recent updates. Even in March and April of 2024, they just quietly put the new PDF out there. So that's why we say bookmark the
Yeah.
PDF. It's a link to the PDF and pull it up every now and then. And look in the upper left-hand corner, if it says March 2024, well, then nothing has changed. That's our current version. If it says something other than that, then that's your clue of, hey, they did this. So that's one thing. The second thing is, when do you implement this? And what happens if it does come out? They have on the draft January 2026 printed on the draft. Now that's meaningless because that's just what they have on the draft. But what if they do
Yeah.
put it out in January? Deborah and I were talking about this offline about that. I don't know. Does it affect your 2025 forms that you're filing this month? I don't know. The only thing that the IRS has ever published was back in the year 2000. On December 31st of 2000, they published a new W-9. And it had something to do with the certification language where they changed it to add a certification that you're a US person and not a foreign person. And that would have affected filings, of course, for the year 2000. So the IRS said you don't have to start using this till July 1st of 2001. It's optional before that. They've never, most of the time they don't even tell us anything about the new W-9s. So we don't have official guidance on what to do.
Oh,
It's just like, here's the new W-9, start using it. And so
and yeah. And on that note, let me just say that I looked up like how many times the IRS has actually updated the W-9 form since it was originally published in 1983. I'll give you a couple of guesses. How many times do you think that is, Jason?
oh, let's see. That's 42 year. I would say 10.
Nope, higher.
I 15.
It is actually 21 times that
21.
the IRS has updated the W-9. And let me just say, a few of those years, right, I was very active, and it's hard to try to get a new W-9 from vendors because, sometimes the point of contact that you're dealing with just got their W-9 from their tax person. They've just been giving it out to everybody that asked for it. And especially if the information hasn't changed, you're like, why can't I just give you this? Because they don't want to go back and go get another one. It'll take too long. So, that many changes. And it's not like the W-8 where most, you right, they usually give like is it a 6 month grace period? There's like no grace period with the W-9. So every time it changes, it does cause friction in the vendor setup and maintenance space, right? Whoever's doing that, because now you have to audit, you have to, when it comes out, collect that new W-9. So I just wanted to put my little 2 cents out there with like how many times they've changed it, because every time they change it, it requires, right, the collection of that new form, which can cause some pushback, frustration, right, that the vendor team always has to deal with.
Well, I like that little factoid. I'm going to start using it too. I'm kind of a nerd like that too. I've actually written an article about the history of the $600 threshold and tracing it through the years, what the thresholds have been, dating back to 1917, actually.
Yeah.
So I like these
Wow.
little fact, 1983 is when the W-9 first started, and 21 times.
Yeah.
I like those things, but that's a different discussion, I guess, for another day.
Yeah.
This leads in, though, to the question that we also don't know the answer to, which is along the lines of when do you start using it, but what do you do about vendors who've given you an EIN when they're an individual sole proprietor? Do you have to get a new one from them? Because usually we say you don't need to resolicit a W-9 from someone who's already given you one if the form
Right.
changes. You just do it going forward with the new
Right.
vendors that you're getting from.
Right.
But I feel like you probably do need to resolicit from anyone who's given you an EIN, because now that would be prohibited. And so the W-9 that you have on file would be flawed, basically. So I guess what are your thoughts on, what would be a strategy? How would you even go about
Yeah.
starting a project like that?
Well, and I actually, the one little savior, right, about those 21 times, right, that the IRS has updated, or revised the Form W-9 is that it didn't have to go out and collect it from, all your existing vendors unless you knew that something changed.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought about it. until you mention that, yes, now you know that something has changed, right? If
Mhm.
that vendor gave you, that's an individual sole proprietor, right? Single member LLC that's filing as a sole proprietor. Um, if you know that they gave you an EIN, you know that, right, it has changed. The rules have changed and they now need to give you a social security number. And so maybe now you do have something that you have to do with existing vendors that fall into that category, and go out and solicit a new W-9 so you can collect that social security number. Now, I will tell you that some systems are just fine to identify, those vendors that are eligible or that, you have to go back and collect it from, because they have clear fields, right? You know, if it's a social security number or EIN, right? Maybe they allow you to put the dashes in. So, because they're both numbers are 9 digits long, but maybe it's formatted, right? Like a social security number. Or maybe you have a field that says this is the social security number or this is the EIN. And so now you know because, maybe that system identifies that vendor as a sole proprietor, individual, right? Or what which 1099 form they're going to get, a 1099 NEC. So you know that is, right, a vendor that is that you have to look at to see if you gave an EIM. And so maybe your accounting system or ERP identifies that very clearly, but not all of them do.
Of course
And
not.
so course not. And so you do need to make sure, right, that you have a way to identify which vendors fall into that scenario that are individual sole proprietors, single member LLCs, right, filing as a sole proprietor, where you have collected their EIN instead of a social security number. And so that would be one of the things that when this form is published, that you have to make sure that you identify and see, what the scope is, what you may have to do. So recommend, right, you always talk to a tax professional, talk to your leadership to make sure that this is the right route to take for your company. Because, if the IRS does not give any clear instruction, sometimes, how you treat something may be up to interpretation. And so, if you're going to do that, definitely make sure that, you check with your tax professional, with your leadership, so that you can make sure it's the right thing to do for your company, and just to let them know that, that's going to be an initiative that you take because, social security number is personally identifiable information. And so you want to make sure you're also taking the precautions to not invite, identity theft or fraud into that process of collecting the new W-9.
Well, that's a nice segue into our last item that we wanted to talk about, which is social security numbers. I mean, it's specific to this if you need to resolicit, but it's just in general too. You're soliciting W-9s from vendors. If it's an individual, they may have a social security number that they're giving you instead of an EIN, even without this change. You're getting
Right.
W-9s and social security numbers. This stuff is flying around by email a lot of times.
Yeah.
Probably not text messages with the W-9 specifically, but this stuff just is out there. What are
Yeah.
some data security precautions, whether you're resoliciting a W-9 because of this proposed change or just in general soliciting for this information?
Yeah. So, a lot of folks that probably listening, practitioners that are listening to this podcast, probably have some manual procedures, right? Especially around collecting vendor setup documents, which has always, as you pointed out, been a risk because when you're collecting the W-9, and this is a different topic too, but banking details as well, that information is personally identifiable, right? It is risky. It can be used for fraud. And so, what you want to make sure is that you try to reduce that risk. And email, regular email itself is very risky because you have no way of verifying who it actually came from. Even if it came from your vendor's internal, right, email account, you don't know if a hacker did that, is in there, sending you stuff. And so you want to make sure that you put some obstacles, right, in the way to try to make sure that you're actually getting that document from, who you think you're getting it from. And so if you don't have something like a vendor setup and maintenance or a vendor self-registration portal, where the vendor has to log in and upload that information, keep their profile up to date. There still are some things that you can do. You can look at maybe some what do you call those, secure email providers, and still, you can have instructions, regular instructions, non-sensitive information going through risky email. But when it comes time to collect those documents that can have that sensitive information on it, like the W-9, let them know that they're going to receive a secure email from, right, another platform. And what I really like about those is that you have to put the vendors or the recipient's email in, and then they don't just reply to it, right? They have to go in and put their information in order to access that email string so that they can attach, once they get in, attach those sensitive documents like the W-9. And so that's a great option because it's an obstacle for fraudsters. They rather just go on to the next potential victim that's not asking for those types of things. And so you can do things like that. I've also seen where some teams will set up like a SharePoint folder for each of the vendors that they're collecting documents from. And when you use something like SharePoint, you can have that folder, right, be accessed by specific email addresses. And so you can have, again, like a separate folder for each vendor and then have them loaded that way. Anything versus, right, coming in regular email. But the other thing I would also like to say is I know a lot of folks will collect the vendor documents from their internal team member because the internal team member collected it from the vendor. I recommend you always deal directly with the vendor because the internal team member, they don't need to see their social security number, right, of the vendors. And a lot of times they will keep those documents that they are giving to you because, number one, they don't know why you needed to get it in the first place, right? Because what, just because the IRS changed the W-9? So they're going to keep it in case you have to ask for it again, especially if you had to go back and forth with the vendor because it was not filled out correctly. So they finally got a good copy and they're just going to keep it. And where are they keeping it? On their C drive in an unsecured place and email. And so get them out of the middle of it. If they don't need to see it, deal directly with the vendor and have them come directly to, right, the vendor team in order to update that information. But again, the biggest piece is to make sure you're getting it out of risky email. Oh, another one too is if you're using, like, if you don't have a vendor self-registration portal, right? A lot of folks don't, but if you're using like another type of portal, like for invoicing, like if you have a e-invoicing portal and the vendor has the ability to upload, then have them upload it into that portal, right? They have to sign in, they have to get into the portal, have them upload it there, and then you can go and get the right, the W-9 from that portal. Again, anything to keep it out of risky email.
Have a process, have a
Yes.
procedure, put some thought into it. Really is that's the main takeaway on data security. Really, it's the main takeaway on anything with vendor setup, 1099s,
Yeah.
1042s, have a process.
Yeah. And can I also say too, so yes, we have to, once the W-9 is published, right, you need to determine right, if you need to go back and get right, the W-9s from those vendors that, fall into that first tax classification and gave you an EIN. But there are also other things that you might need to do as well. So if you're using a substitute W-9, which the IRS does allow, and I actually recommend it because you're collecting more information than you would with a regular W-9, right? Because you get the legal name, you get the DBA, you get one address, and you get the tax ID, and that's it. But if you have your own substitute W-9, which I consider that like the IRS form of the W-9 plus your vendor setup form, combine the two. And so if you have that because you want to collect more information, that's great. You have to make sure that you update it because one of the requirements of from the IRS of using a substitute W-9 is that it's always updated. So every time they come out with a new version of the W-9, you need to update it. But I tell you one thing that is really good about using a substitute W-9, especially when they have updates, is that you'll update your substitute W-9. And when you send it to the vendor, number one, don't call it a substitute W-9, call it a vendor setup form. And the IRS will know that it's a substitute W-9 because it complies. But send that to the vendor and have them fill that out. Now, they may attach a W-9 if they want because they already have it. And even if they attach an older version because they don't understand why you need the new version, but even if they attach an older version, it's fine because your vendor setup form is your substitute W-9. So I really like it for that reason too, especially when there are changes or a revised form that has just come out. But you do, again, have to make sure that you update it every time the IRS updates the forms. And then the other thing I recommend that you do is just to make sure that you update all your desktop procedures that deal with the W-9, because usually they have a visual of it, right? In my desktop procedures, I have a visual of the W-9, and I also identify, right, for those team members that are using it for reference, right, how to look at it, how to know when to send it back to the vendor, how to know when you can accept it, right? And so now you have to put on there that if they selected that first tax class, right? That first checkbox in line 3A, that you have to collect the social security number. So put that in there too. So make sure you're updating your desktop procedures. And then also, if you are sending forms, the W-9 along with your instructions to the vendor to fill out as part of your vendor, document package, if you do that, make sure you're updating that form with the newest version as well.
Well, we live in interesting information reporting times, don't we, Deborah? None of
We
this stuff is
do.
easy. And I hope our listeners caught the number of times that we said, I think this is what you should do with this. I mean, you and I are probably in the top 0.1% of people who think about these things. And
Yeah.
there are things that we don't know. People ask
Yeah.
these questions like, well, what should I do with the W-9 with this or that? It's like, I don't know. The IRS
Yeah.
doesn't know either. And so it's those procedures talking to whoever, I always say the applicable party. It could be your
Yeah.
accountant, your CFO, office manager, tax manager, whatever. Talk to them and get a reasonable basis. That's always something that the IRS talks about with penalty relief and stuff, reasonable basis. So think it through. Why are you
Yeah.
doing what you're doing? And sometimes we don't have great guidance on things, so you have to make a decision and make a reasonable decision.
Yeah, because I always say, the IRS does not accept, Deborah said.
Right. That is
So
true.
make sure you do your due diligence for your company. So yes, I definitely agree with that. But it would be nice, and we're just gonna cross some fingers to see if the IRS will do it, right? If
Right.
they, when they publish this W-9, whatever revision date it is, they publish it with great guidance. We're just gonna put that out in the air.
Right. We can always hope. All right. Well, Deborah
Yes.
Richardson, thanks so much for joining us.
All right. Thank you, Jason. This is a very great topic. You can tell I'm a little emotional about it, but it's all good.
And our thanks to Deborah Richardson, accounts payable speaker, consultant, and trainer, for being our guest this week. A little more about Deborah. She has over 20 years of experience in AP, AR, general ledger, and financial reporting for Fortune 500 companies, including Verizon, General Motors, and Aramark. For over a decade, Deborah has focused on global vendor setup and maintenance. As AP Senior Manager, she led a team that processed over 2,000 vendor add change requests each month and was responsible for 140,000 plus active global vendors across 7 ERPs, and she's filed 30,000 1099s and 1042S forms every year. So when she talks about these things as our guest today or in any of her consultancy and speaking and training, she has deep, deep experience in this subject. She has a weekly podcast called Putting the AP in Happy. Check that out. And visit her website at deborah.richardson.com. I'm Jason Dinesen. That'll do it for this week's episode of Information Return Intelligence.